saying the obligatory couple of words to make sure
Yep.
that we're all set.
And we are going. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to What the Hype. Micah and I are back this week to react and recap White Lotus Season 3, Episode 7. Obviously, a ton going on in this episode. And, very much like is the true form of the White Lotus. It really leaves us kind of on a precipice for what to expect in the finale. I know that we usually go character by character, so I thought maybe we could just start out by talking about the rat lifts because there is a lot of emphasis placed on them in this
Yeah,
episode as well. They're so interesting.
they
Like,
are.
yeah, I mean, kind of in some ways terrible people. But at the same time, this episode, I think, really goes a long way to further humanizing them. What do you think?
Yeah, what are we going to do without America's Newest Family after next week's episode, next week's finale? I, I, I do agree with you. There was a lot of humanizing that went on in this episode for the rat lifts. The first that comes to mind for me is actually Saxon. He
Mm-hmm.
has a little bit of a 180 here. The conversation, which very awkward conversation, by the way, at the party with Chelsea and Chloe. But the fact that he makes the decision to not go through with it, and of course, we're talking about basically Chloe propositioned Saxon for a follow up threesome, but this time instead of Lachlan being involved, it was going to be Gary. And I think Saxon early on in this season would have followed through with it and would have probably done it. Saxon episode 7 heading into the finale is a different person. We see more of that in his interaction with Timothy, and he can tell that there's something wrong with his dad and he just can't seem to get through to him. And then later on, the interaction that he has with Chelsea as they're heading back to the White Lotus and actually in her hotel room, we're not sure what's about to go down. It seems like they actually have a moment of connection, possibly between the two of them. Chelsea backs off, but Saxon is just kind of left in this state that we've not quite seen him in before. But I think we got to see a little bit more of his personality. As you were saying, he gets humanized a bit as a
Yeah,
character in this episode.
definitely. Will you see him kind of have this glass break moment where he realizes that something is probably going on with the family business? That's probably why his father is so out of sorts. And he's really direct in saying, Dad, I don't have anything else. I have formed my entire life around work and working on this company and working with you. And if you're telling me that the company's going down, that means I'm going down too. And everything that I've ever worked towards is for naught. So it makes complete sense that somebody who's put in that kind of situation would want to take some like autonomy back. And when, Saxon had someone like Chloe coming along, effectively trying to use him, right? He's saying, no, I've actually been used my entire life to, really like go all in on this idea of like the family run business and to kind of be like my father's protege. I kind of modeled myself after him because I thought that's what my family wanted. But now, he doesn't want to do what other people want him to do. And it makes sense. He's probably panicking.
I think that's right. And in mentioning Timothy, he's got a lot going on in this episode, and we only have one episode left to go. So, for how much longer can he keep up this ruse with his family? Saxon is slowly catching on. Victoria, I think, has been caught on for quite a while at this point, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe is not revealing herself fully. If you were to guess as to how things play themselves out in the finale, do you think that Timothy will reveal the truth about the business, or will the truth about the business reveal itself?
That's a tough question. I mean, looking at the Ratliffs, you already see this like fissure in their family. I mean, we also had Lachlan in this episode saying he wanted to stay with Piper at the monastery in Thailand. So we already have two of the kids who are out. We have the third kid who is starting to get suspicious that his father, at the very least, is keeping something really important from him. And I think when and if it does come out, that's probably going to be a scorched earth territory type thing between Saxon and Timothy. So I tend to think that it's probably just going to come out. I don't think I've seen anything in Timothy's character thus far that would make me believe that he would finally grow a pair and just own up to what's going on. I think he's going to try and avoid it as long as he can. And I think it's ultimately going to contribute to some kind of family blow up that is not going to be easy to come back from.
Yeah. And we know Pam has their phones.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming once those phones get turned back on, the truth is going to come out. Now,
Yeah.
Timothy can do as much as he can to prevent them from getting their phones back. But again, we're at the last episode, the last day at the White Lotus. So truth has to come out in one form or another. But I did want to ask you, particularly because Timothy has been taking a lot of medication over the course of the time that he's been in Thailand. I'm wondering how much it's influencing his state of mind. Like, and what I mean
Oh,
by that
definitely.
is he hearing what he wants to hear from his family, meaning what Victoria said in prior episodes about not being able to live if she didn't have all the comforts that being rich affords her. You know, the conversation with Saxon in this episode. I'm not saying that they're not saying those things, but could he be? I don't know what this medication ultimately does. Like, could he be hallucinating to some effect? Because now we've had subsequent episodes where he's gotten reasons from members of his family to not only kill himself, but to kill them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of it is him hearing what he wants to hear. I think it's also him like incorrectly finding comfort in the advice that he's given, whether it's from his family or whether it's from the monk at the monastery. And he's like filtering that through the lens of somebody who's obviously flirting with suicide in order to escape this, very unpleasant thing that's happening to him right now. Um, but the lorazepam definitely doesn't help. I don't think it would make him hallucinate, but it's an anti-anxiety medication, so it's intended to kind of take the edge off.
Okay.
Um, but he's popping them shits like candy, and
And how
when
does
you're
Victoria not know or say
I think
something?
she knows. I think she knows he's doing it. There's no way, especially for someone who is as obsessed with her lorazepam as she is. She talks about it all the freaking time. I think she knows he's doing it, and for some reason, she's letting it happen. I don't know why. But he's impaired. There's no getting around it. He's absolutely impaired, especially if he's drinking on top of it too, because we see when they go to
The
Gary's
party.
house for the party, he immediately goes to the bar. And yeah, drinking on top of an anti-anxiety medication, not a good mix.
Well, let's go to the monastery for a little bit. You mentioned Lachlan and Piper earlier, and there's some scenes that, well, one scene in particular, I think, that had many viewers on edge, and that was when the two of them were sitting in bed together. And I just think Lachlan is lost. Lachlan is
Yeah.
looking for some direction in his life, and he was hoping that by staying with Piper, he could hopefully find himself. Maybe I because I think he tried the Saxon route and it didn't work out, and now he's trying the Piper route, and it's clear that as much as Piper may love her brother, she doesn't want him there. And I think for him it's all about figuring out like where he is in life and what he wants from it. And
Yep.
he's just like a lost puppy basically at this
Yeah,
point.
he doesn't know who he is. And I mean, granted, I don't think any of these kids know who they are. I think that the little speech that the monk gave Timothy about young people from America being lost and sort of having that spiritual malaise that applies to all three of them. These kids, I mean, they're kind of sheltered and emotionally stunted. It's not their fault. That's just how they were raised.
It's Western
But yeah,
culture.
yeah. I mean, I do agree though. I think Lachlan doesn't really know who he is, and I think he is trying to look to his older siblings for cues on what he should be into, and it's not going very well for him because you're right. Piper doesn't want him there. And I get it. This is her thing. Like she wants to strike out on her own and do this. This is something that she's kind of been building up towards for a while. We know she's been studying it and reading these books. And so for Lachlan to just very cavalierly say, "Hey, I think I actually want to come stay here as well," probably felt a little bit uncomfortable for her.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see it in her reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And there is though the moment when well, she I don't know that she was asleep, but she kind of like rises out of bed a little bit later on in the episode, and you don't really know, like, is it just there's thoughts racing through her head, is she going to go somewhere?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it hopefully put a lot of folks fears to rest about a potential round two
Yeah.
encounter with the Ratliff siblings. So
Yeah.
I, but in terms of heading into the finale, I'm not sure where this leaves Lachlan, where it leaves Piper. They're kind of on the outside looking in of the Ratliff family right now,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Yeah.
if we're to believe that Timothy is going to go down the road, and we see him looking for the gun in the final few moments of this episode to, at the very least, take himself out. But based on the visions that we've seen, the whole family is at risk. And we haven't seen
Mm-hmm.
him have any visions about Lachlan or Piper, but he has one about Saxon in this episode. He has another one about Victoria. He had
Mm-hmm.
Victoria in his visions in previous episodes. So I'm not feeling too good about this family. We said that they may not leave Thailand, but now I'm thinking for a whole nother reason altogether.
Yeah, no, I think somebody might not spiritually leave Thailand anyway. But yeah, we see even in the preview for the finale, a lot of focus on Timothy. And then, of course, there was a shot of, a body bag. Um, so I think, that's leading us to believe that whoever it is that ends up in that body bag may be from the Ratcliffe family. But it could also be a huge misdirect. White Lotus is known for this. It
Mm.
would not surprise me if we went the entire season building towards the possibility of like Timothy being the one who ends up face down in the water. But it could end up actually being somebody else
Hmm.
next week. And they did a lot this week, I think, to set us up to question the theories that we've been making. Like something that stood out to me as very interesting was Mook this week, because I feel like last week we had basically written her off as like, they're not doing anything special with her character. She's just kind of there. But then in this episode, which by the way is called Killer Instincts, she's kind of lecturing Guy Talk about needing to be more ambitious and needing to find it in himself to have that violent streak so that he can get a promotion at work. She's kind of goading him.
No, but and where is this
Yeah.
coming from though?
Yeah.
Too,
It,
it's if you
it
don't want to date the guy, just move on.
right. It really felt like it came out of left field.
Hmm.
Of course, we haven't, this is the first time we've gotten to see them actually on a proper date. Every other interaction has been
No,
at the
it took
resort.
7 episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it could just be that they didn't finally get to start getting to know each other better until the date, but it was definitely weird. She was definitely trying to push him, and you could see him thinking about it and contemplating it while they were at the fight. So I wonder how that's going to manifest next week as well.
And speaking of that preview, you do see a shot of Guy Talk running with the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just say for this episode in particular, I really enjoyed the fight symbolism and the fact that in this arena, not only do you have two fighters going at each other, on one side of the arena, you have Guy Talk, and then on the other side of the arena, you have Valentin and his friends, Vlad and Alexei, and Guy Talk puts the pieces of the puzzle together during the fight. He recognizes what happened on that day of the robbery. We had talked about how Valentin was an accomplice because he was distracting Guy Talk. That proves to be true. And that Vlad and Alexei were the ones responsible for the robbery. And now it's a question of going off of what you were saying, that conversation with Mook, there's going to be a confrontation that's going to happen in this finale. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's fair to say the confrontation is going to be Guy Talk versus the Russians.
Yep.
And that's where a lot of the gunfire is going to come from.
Yeah.
I would be
And I
surprised. Sorry, we can throw the
no,
monkey
go
theory
ahead.
out the window. I don't, as much as and exciting as that would be, I don't see it going in that direction now. And the only
Yeah.
gun there's really only like three groups that we know at this point that have a gun because Rick gets rid of his gun in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So Guy Talk has a gun, or the security team has a gun. The Russians have guns, and then presumably Shritala and Jim Hollinger's bodyguards have guns.
Definitely.
So Timothy no longer has a gun. Rick no longer has a gun. So I'm just doing the math with the
Yeah.
guns that are left
Right.
in
Exactly.
this season.
Right. Totally. And I think it'll be interesting to see who all gets pulled in to the inevitable shootout, if you will, between all these characters because Lori is actually at the fight with the Russians and she ends up hooking up with Alexei, who then starts trying to pressure her for
So
money
weird.
while they're having their pillow talk. And
Can you
it's
Venmo
very,
me
yeah.
$10,000?
He was like, "Do you have Zelle?" And he has a sob story about wanting to get his mom out of Russia, may or may not be true. But it's very clear that this whole arrangement with Valentin and his friends, they are, in one way or another, stealing from the resort and from the guests of the resort. Actually, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was an ongoing scheme that they had for quite a while. And if they actually went out of their way to sweet talk some of the middle aged women there and take them out and show them a good time and then try to coerce them
Mm.
into giving them money. That's probably a game they've played a million times before this. And they've probably robbed the resort before too, if I'm being real. Like, I can't imagine this is the first time something like that's happened.
No, I mean maybe it's a little bit more underhanded in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how they're stealing from the resort, but I would imagine some of those pieces of jewelry that they took could easily cover the cost of what Alexei is looking for. So the fact that
Yeah.
he's pressuring Lori into additional money just feels really skeezy.
Yeah, but I mean, that's probably just their whole it's probably just their whole routine, honestly.
But
Like, go
does
ahead.
does this now put Lori in danger though because she knows the truth about who stole the jewelry from the hotel, and is she going to go back and share that with Jacqueline and Kate?
Yeah, well, and also is she going to be a target either by the three Russian men or potentially clearly their significant others at this point? Based on how Alexi and Lori were found, it's very clear that these three have significant others that they're chronically cheating on with people at the resort.
Yeah.
So there are a few people that would want to put Lori's name in the death note. That's
It
for
does seem
sure.
though that given the blow up that we have with our girls trip earlier on in the episode, that and what has happened here, that we're trending in the direction of the three of them reuniting in some capacity. I'm not saying they're going to be BFFs once this is all over, but I do see the possibility of them coming together in this final episode.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be BFFs when it ends. They also weren't BFFs when it started either.
Were they ever is the question.
Yeah, it's very clear that this is a frenemy situation where they all talk crap on each other when others aren't around. They're in competition with each other, especially Jacqueline. She wants to be the prettiest, the most sought after, the most famous, etc., etc. But yeah,
Yeah.
I could very well see them like saying let's let bygones be bygones and never speak again at the end of this trip. I think they'll all survive though.
I agree. I it Yeah, it just would feel almost off if it was one of the three of them. Doesn't really fit with the narrative of the season.
Yeah. Although Chelsea does have that line. It was either last episode or two episodes back where she says bad luck comes in threes.
Mm.
So there could be something with that, but I don't know. I see the three of them as being the least likely. I feel like that's more likely to apply to the Ratliff children because they're a trio as well.
There's definitely something to that. It wouldn't have just been said in passing and then not have any payoff in the finale.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little
Um,
bit about Rick
yes. We have to talk about Rick
and
because,
Frank
whoo,
and talk about not pre-planning and going over your lines before. I can't imagine that Shritala believed any of this.
she didn't. Absolutely not. She knew they were full of it from the. Honestly, I think she knew they were full of it as far back as the restaurant when Rick met up with her there.
Oh, and yeah,
Yeah.
and wanted to go to her house.
Yeah, that's not weird. But it was very clear they hadn't coordinated on, what their fake names were. In one case, they also had not coordinated on what this movie was supposed to be about or what prior knowledge this fake director had of Sritala's career because she asked him, put him on the spot, which of my movies have you seen? And he fumbles. He can't answer it, but she very sweetly lets it slide during the conversation and kind of helps him get there. But she definitely knows he's full of it.
Yeah,
100%. Like,
it's almost like she is just waiting for the situation to play itself out. She's
mm-hmm.
like, the longer I can let them go, eventually the truth is going to reveal itself.
Yeah. Well, and everybody's like really cool about Rick and Jim just going to another room together, and Sritala's super content to sit there with Frank and watch her old movies
Hmm.
so that he can basically gas her up the entire time. Um, but it's definitely, it would be odd to me if someone was like, "Hey, can I come to your house so that you can be in this movie because I really want to get a sense of who you are," except the star of my movie is actually a prostitute. But also, can I go talk to your husband in another room and leave you here with this guy who's clearly not a director? I think the fact that they so easily let that happen is because they had everything under control. I think they knew exactly who these two were and why they were there. And I think they had it handled. I think if
Mm.
things had gone sideways, I actually think that Frank and Rick would have been the ones ending up in body bags, not
Wow.
not Jim and Sritala.
And let's not forget now that Rick is going back to the hotel that these two people own. Presumably, I mean, unless Rick's just going to get on a plane and go somewhere else and leave Chelsea to fend for herself, but I don't see that necessarily happening. So if I were Rick, I would be concerned. He seems, and you talk about humanizing people going back. We're talking about Saxon earlier, but with Rick, he chooses not to kill Jim, and that's a huge moment for him. That said, he kind of goes off and celebrates, and again, you got to imagine that these people are going to be looking for him.
Yeah.
He just
I don't know.
assaulted. How old is Jim Hollinger?
Yeah.
70, 80, maybe?
Yeah, I want to talk about Jim Hollinger too because I felt like these characters were very intentionally acted to look related,
Hmm.
aka the theory about Jim being Rick's father. They just, their mannerisms, the way they spoke, it just felt like there were a lot of similarities in how they presented. And I wanted to ask you if you felt this way, it kind of made me feel like it subconsciously caused Rick to choke. Because we see in the moment, he goes to get the gun out. He's ready to fully attack and kill Jim. But then ultimately, he just looks at him and he can't do it because he's an old man who's defenseless and really can't hurt anybody anymore. But I also wonder if Rick was maybe on a subconscious level having a realization that this could potentially be his father.
It's possible. Just thinking back to the reaction that Jim has when Rick says his mother's name,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know though that there's enough time in the finale for us to go down this road of a revelation. Maybe that in and of itself for all of us was the revelation.
Maybe. It does feel like there's something that's been left unsaid, though. I feel like I need a little more closure on this storyline because it's been Rick's driving force the entire time. I mean, it's why he's here. So I'm going to need them to close the loop on that one, or at the
Hmm.
very least, give us some kind of satisfying ending that leaves the door open for Rick to come back in a future season and carry his story on, kind of like Gary. Greg Gary has, spanned multiple seasons.
That's fair.
Um,
And in the preview we do see the Hollanders returning to the White Lotus. Both of them are there
mm-hmm.
along with their bodyguards. So fair to say that there likely may be another encounter between them and Rick. I think Rick has some answering to do, especially as it relates to Shrutala. If nobody else is owed an explanation, I feel like she is because he just didn't treat her very well. Even
No.
though I agree with you, she knows more than she's letting on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that's a theme with a lot of women in the White Lotus in general. I think a lot of the female characters tend to play their cards close to the vest and usually know more about what's going on than they let on. So we'll have to see. But we're coming up on the finale.
Yeah.
And big question that always comes with finale is who dies? So if we had to pick at this point, who do we think, and we don't just have to pick one person, we can throw multiple names out there, but who do we think is ripe for the picking?
Well, one person, just very quickly, that I think we can take off the board, at least as it pertains to the body we see in the Lotus Pond, is Gary. And
Yep.
we didn't talk about Gary and Belinda at all, but we did talk about it on our last reaction episode, and it pretty much played out the way that we anticipated, which I think a lot of people anticipated, which was that Gary was going to make an offer to Belinda. He does. She clearly wants none of it. And Zion, on the other hand, looks like he might put a little bit of pressure on his mother to take the money and run
Yeah.
because the likelihood is if you don't, Gary ain't disappearing anytime soon. And I don't think he's somebody that Belinda wants kind of like creeping over her shoulder.
No, not at all. Although I gotta say, he lowballed her 100K for
He did.
lying about murder. I don't know. All I gotta say is I would have been like, you want to add a zero? You want to add a couple zeros to
Yeah,
that number? And then
that's
maybe we
fair.
can talk.
That is very fair. I
But
agree
Belinda's a
with
better
you.
person than I am. So she of course did the right thing and is like, no, I don't want this guy's money. But you're totally right. I mean, that's also going to be, it seems like a confrontation next week. Is just this pressure between mother and son. And of course, like for Belinda, that's like such a carrot to dangle out in front of her because We know she just had a conversation last week with Porn Chai about opening their own spa, and $100,000 in Thailand would be, a good
Go very
first
far.
step, yeah, towards doing that. But, is it the right thing to do? No. So, I don't think Belinda is honestly, I think Belinda's safe. I think
I
Belinda's safe.
agree.
Like, well, she's
Was it
not
you?
safe,
Was it
but
you, or was it maybe something else that I read or listened to said that the way that Zion reacts, if that was your mother, you would have naturally gravitated directly to the body as opposed to like his reaction in that moment.
mm,
But I agree with
yeah.
you. I think that Belinda is safe. I feel fairly confident in that. Now, in terms of, I agree with you. We can throw out a couple of possibilities here and just kind of debate a little bit back and forth. My biggest concern, and the person I'll put at the top of my list is Guy Talk. I'm
Yeah.
very concerned for him.
Yeah. So for me, it's Guy Talk. It is Timothy and Saxon in particular. I think all the rat lifts are in danger, but I think those two in particular. Um, I think, I think we said this last week, but I zoomed in on the floating body from episode 1, and it definitely looks like a man. Definitely someone with short hair. They looked white to me, but again, that doesn't mean that only one person dies,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah, look at
Um,
season two
yeah,
as an example of that.
totally. So yeah, I think those three are in my top danger spots for next week.
If I had to pick a few others, I agree with Timothy. I mean, that's been his journey really this entire season. So to not have him on the list, I feel like would be a misstep.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to pick one more, perhaps like one of the Russian trio,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's fair.
maybe Valentine.
I feel like some of these side characters are going to be collateral damage for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it would be kind of cool if Valentine got taken out by one of the Mean Girl trio. Like that would be very poetic. Um, but we'll see. We'll have to see. I'm
Yeah,
really excited for next week, though.
same. I agree with you. I feel like there could be some collateral damage. You think back to the season one, like could Fabian just kind of like be wrong place, wrong time? He sang
Totally.
this episode. He can
Oh
sing.
yeah. Speaking of which, we were all making fun of him. He sounded great,
He's great. Yeah, he should go on
but
American
nobody
Idol.
noticed. Nobody
I
noticed it.
know.
He was good, but nobody was paying attention. Poor guy.
And what about Porn Chai? I mean, he wasn't in this episode, but we've talked in the past about how he maybe could be somebody who steps in to protect somebody like Belinda
He
and
better.
pays for it.
So here's the thing. If it turns out that he is evil and he has nefarious intent and he is also trying to scam Belinda, I don't
Ooh.
think my heart can take it, because this would be a second time that that has happened to her, where someone has made this grandiose offer and she started forming a closer relationship with that person only to have them screw her over. If he does that to her, then yeah, maybe he'll end up being one of the bodies too. But
Maybe.
um, yeah, it's just I hope not, because she's been through a lot. She deserves a little loving.
The only thing that really scares me about how far this all could go is seeing the preview for next week, seeing Timothy talking with Pam about the forbidden fruit, and then there's a scene of a blender.
The blender. Yep. And
So
you called this actually. You called this either last week or in the week before. You were like, the fruit and the blender. They keep showing them. So
well, now
yeah,
that
that was a really good call.
Timothy doesn't have a gun, and I'm sure I read it somewhere, so I can't take full credit myself by any stretch. But yeah, it's been a popular fan theory that given how much the blender has shown up and, a passing mention in episode one about that fruit and comes full circle in the season finale, the question will be, I mean, I think we're going in that direction. The question will be, does somebody else intervene before people
Yeah.
start drinking those smoothies?
Right. Like is Timothy potentially going to make a whole dose for his family? And be like, "Hey guys."
That's
Yeah.
what I think we're headed towards, but I don't know that all of them will end up drinking it.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Piper and Lachlan or Liper and Lachlan, as they get called this episode, I think of the Ratcliffes, I feel like they are the safest, even though being in that family automatically puts them in danger.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, good call on the blender stuff.
But it'll be exciting. I know we're
Hmm.
looking forward to doing a reaction episode, and then we'll do a full blown podcast on all of season three of The White Lotus
I
next
can't
week.
wait for that. Yeah. So next week, lots of more White Lotus content to look forward to from us as we wrap up the season. And something that I also wanted to call out here quickly was that the trailer for The Last of Us Season 2 played ahead of this week's
Oh,
episode of The White
I missed
Lotus.
that.
And The Last of Us Season 2 is actually the next show that we're going to be covering here on What the Hype. So, Last of Us Season 2 will be dropping on April 13th. And similarly, we're going to be doing weekly episode reactions as well as a couple of deeper dive episodes into the franchise. So, a lot of good stuff between White Lotus and Last of Us coming up to keep y'all fed and happy at home.
Yeah. And if listeners have thoughts, drop them in the comments. Who do you think is in that body bag in
Yeah.
the finale of The White Lotus? And it's going to be probably at least a year before we return to one of their resorts. So, but that's,
Yeah. Although I hear that resorts around the world are offering Mike White free stays there
are
because
they
they
really?
want the next season to be shot at their resort. Yes, they're vying for it apparently.
I also heard that they're selling packages for you to go to all three of the Four Seasons locations. No, I'm
That's
serious. I
funny.
heard this on the radio one morning. I forget what the price tag was, but it's some absurd amount of money. And it's essentially like the White Lotus vacation package. And you will go to Hawaii, Italy, and Thailand and visit all of the resorts and places that they filmed the White Lotus.
That's awesome. Are you going to
I don't have that kind of money.
go?
I have to hit up Gary and see if he can loan me a
There we go. There we
couple
go.
$100,000.
Let me know if you survive that conversation.
Well, you know what? We'll save it for our next week's episode, but we need to talk more about Gary's fetishes.
Yeah, there needs to be some special time set aside for Gary because
Because that just kind of came out of left field. Like, that's why you wanted Saxon and Lachlan to come to the party.
I don't believe it. I think he had more nefarious intent there, maybe, and it almost makes me wonder if the fetish might run a little deeper and be more than just
Mm,
what Chloe was presenting to Saxon. Because again, the way that Gary presents it to her is he says like, I need you to help me with something or
right.
something like that. So it just kind of feels like how he's asking her is being portrayed differently to Saxon. I think Saxon might have actually dodged a bullet, literally. by not doing that. But we'll see next week.
Yeah. Well,
Well, that's. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, 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 no. I think we covered everything. I'm the one final thing I'll say is that I am curious to see how Frank will react to everything because he completely deviated from the character that he presented himself as when we first met him a couple episodes ago. And he was sober, he wasn't doing drugs, he wasn't drinking, he had completely changed his lifestyle. And now, because of the situation that Rick has looped him into, he went on a complete bender. And is that a problem for Rick? I don't know. But there could be some fallout from that too.
I think so. Well, and I think Rick kind of let that go a little too easily when Frank started, regressing on
Yeah,
his
he should have stepped
sobriety.
in
Yeah.
as a
I would
friend.
you would think as a friend, yeah. Um but, Rick, he's also not in the best place. So,
No.
and he's also definitely not sober. But yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out next week. Chelsea's definitely not going to be happy about it because she's been trying to call him and he's not answering the phone.
Chelsea. The
Yeah, poor thing. She's the innocent person that we all really hope gets spared this week.
yeah.
But we'll have to see. As Micah said, we will be back next week with another reaction episode to the finale, following up with our larger season 3 deep dive analysis. So keep an eye on that. Also, make sure that you are following What the Hype podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on our various social channels. We are What the Hype podcast across the board, except for on Twitter. But I mean, or X as it's known now, but who really uses that anymore anyway? We're What the Hype show over there. But yeah, definitely super appreciate everybody who's been engaging in the comments and watching all of these reactions. Like Micah said, we would love to know who y'all think is ending up in the body bag next week. So we will be on pins and needles waiting for the next episode. And we can't wait to come back and chat everything over with y'all when it's finally all wrapped. But
Yeah.
until then, we will leave you. Thanks so much, Micah, for hopping on with me.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, y'all. We will see you next time. Bye bye. All right,
Cool.
stopping. Cool. Well,